Go ahead.
Cool. Hi, my name is Sandra Maina, and I'm now a second-year master's student here at FIU. My master's thesis committee is composed of Dr. Mozinder, who's my main advisor, and I have Dr. Gladwin and Dr. Ganapati, who are both from the GSS department, the Global Sociocultural Studies department, and Dr. Us is also on my committee. So today I'm just going to talk to you about the work that I've been doing here and also in conjunction with NCAR, the National Center for Atmospheric Research. And it's mostly about a mobile application that I created with the southern communities of Louisiana, and it's more of a community-based, community-driven application. And in doing so, I'm hoping that this app will hopefully positively influence climate change adaptation, especially in that coastal region. And so, like I said, this was in conjunction with NCAR, and the research that I started with is with an internship called SOARS. And SOARS basically allows, they pick 20 students nationwide to go do research at the NCAR laboratory up in Boulder. And I did my bachelor's in meteorology, so for the first, and it's a four-summer internship. So for the first 2 summers, I was actually doing hurricane modeling, hurricane risk assessment. I actually created a hurricane index that predicted the amount of damage in dollars that a storm would cause before it makes landfall. And that was awesome. I really enjoyed it. But when it came to my 3rd summer, summer 2012, I kind of realized that I have a passion for hurricanes. I have a passion of looking at the societal impacts of hurricanes. But throughout my early academic career, I've separated community service and hurricane impacts, basically, and I didn't have any sort of way to combine the two, and I wasn't exactly sure of how to be put on a career path where I'd be able to use both aspects that I truly were passionate about. And especially in light of climate change, I wanted to add that aspect into my career also, but I wasn't exactly sure how to go about doing so. So I asked the people at NCAR, how is it that I can pursue such a career? And fortunately, they were able to collaborate with the University of New Orleans, UNO-CHART, and they basically shipped me off to Louisiana. I had no idea what I was going to do in Louisiana. I don't know what research I was going to do. All I knew is that I was going to be doing community field work, and I was excited about that. But what I was going to do, I had no idea. So I kind of did like a little bit of Louisiana research ahead of time. And I just looked up the basic facts, mostly about their industry. So Louisiana is the #1 producer of shrimp, oysters, and crawfish, and about 1/3 of the seafood that we consume in the United States is coming from Louisiana. So their seafood industry is prominent. The oil and gas industry, about 1/4 of the oil and gas that we use in the U.S. is pumped through the Louisiana wetland system. And that wetland system in itself comprises 40% of the wetlands total in the United States. So economically, that Louisiana is extremely important for the United States, but it's also important for habitats and wildlife. They are home to, Louisiana wetlands are home to about 735 different species of birds and animals, all of which are now being threatened by this problem of extreme land loss, a problem that I was not aware of before entering or getting into Louisiana. But within the first week of me being in Louisiana, I saw this picture at least 100 times. So basically what we're looking at is South Louisiana, and just as a reference point, there's New Orleans. And so I'm sure, I don't know if you can read what's on the top, but basically it's saying from the years 1932 to 2000, about 1,900 square miles of land has been lost in Louisiana, and that's equivalent to the size of Delaware. And at its current land loss rates, it's basically the size of land in a football field is being lost per hour. If you think about that, that's kind of a very shocking statistics. They call it the triple F football field for, I guess, FFH. But it's a statistic that's thrown around a lot. And also in this figure, they have the red is the land loss and the yellow is the predicted land loss out to 2050. And where I was stationed, or where I went to, was in this little yellow box down in Terrebonne Bay. Most people don't even think that there's anything south of New Orleans, but there is, and that's where I did my research. So it's one thing to look at this land loss to be an illustration, but to look at it looking at Landsat imagery. I was able to get Landsat imagery from USGS down in Lafayette. And they gave me imagery from 1932 to 2010, but I just wanted to show you the difference just from 1973 to 2010. You can just ignore the red boxes for now, but basically what you're looking at is the lighter gray areas is land, not necessarily stable land. It is the wetlands, and then the darker gray areas are the water. So as we transition from 1973 to 2010, you can see the big difference in how much more open water there is just between those two different years. And so one thing you can look at is this body of water over here, how much larger it gets between the 2 years. And then also in the upper right hand, there's a lot of wetland loss also. So in my time when I was those first couple of weeks in Louisiana, I realized that this land loss is a problem, but all I was looking at it was from these imageries, from the illustrations, and so then I had a scientist tell me, would you like to go do a flyover of the area? So I was able to go onto a plane and actually look at these aerial views. So now you can look at the red, there you go, this red rectangle, that's a little island called Ile de Jean Charles. And in this image, it kind of looks big, but really, when you fly over it, this is what it looks like in reality. It's a pretty small place. It's only home to about 25 different families, and it's actually more of a Native American community. They are protected somewhat by a ring levee, but it really has it doesn't have an effect even when it comes to tropical storms. Tropical storms will cover this island well over 4 feet of water very easily. So any type of major hurricane, you can imagine what type of damage it's going to do. And even strong southeasterly winds is going to very easily flood the area. Unfortunately, this island, the only point of access they have to this island is this little road up on the right-hand corner. And again, from the plane, the road kind of looks like a piece of string. And it's extremely vulnerable to, again, the hurricane and flooding. Down on the ground, when I finally was driving around in these areas, this is what the road looks like on the ground. A lot of the locals make a joke that you can basically shrimp off of this road. You can literally put a boat on this road and throw it and cast your nets on either side and probably catch fish. Like, that's how small this road is. And it looked even worse beforehand. I don't know if you guys heard of the movie Beasts of the Southern Wild or not. They'd actually done quite a lot of construction to this road after the movie. And they're able to get a lot of funding to help fix this road. So in terms of, oh, not yet. Okay, sorry. One more thing. The amount of land loss is actually, the technology especially can't even keep up with the amount of land loss in the area. In the plane that we're flying in, the GPS, here's where we are right now. The GPS is saying that we're currently flying over land. The black symbolizes land, the blue symbolizes water. Look out the window, and you're not flying over land right now. So you can see that it's very much a problem. And there are many different factors affecting land loss, but I'm only going to talk about 3 of them. One of them being the oil and gas industry. When you drive around Louisiana, you're going to see a lot of these little signs saying, warning, there's a natural gas pipeline. And from the years 1955 to 1980, about 1,000 square miles of land was lost because of oil and gas industry, and mainly for 2 reasons. when you're extracting gas and oil from subsurface of these wetlands, you are decreasing the integrity of these wetlands. And then also the amount of dredging that's needed to put in these pipelines is also going to create havoc on the wetlands. So this is an example of a picture that I got from a community member in 1932. Basically the canals and the waterways were about 4 boats across, and these are small boats. They're not really big boats. You can just tell by the scale of the people to the boats. But now as you fly over, you'll see these unnaturally straight waterways, and this is what the canals look like now, where it goes from 4 boats wide to basically 8 to 10 boats wide, and it's because of this bank erosion, and this bank erosion is basically causing a funnel effect of salt water into this area. And saltwater intrusion can be seen anywhere you drive around South Louisiana. This is an example of a ghost forest, basically. So all these cypress trees and cypress forests that they once had are now gone because of the effects of saltwater intrusion. Alright, so the second reason is the leveeing of the Mississippi River. So back in the Holocene period, at least every 1,000 to 1,500 years, the Mississippi would meander back and forth, creating these deltas, and let's call them deltaic lobes. So naturally, deltas are formed by the flooding of the Mississippi, and when it floods, it's naturally going to cause sediment deposition. However, now that we have leveed the Mississippi more for agricultural purposes and urban growth, it stopped this natural deposition. Naturally, deltas are going to subside regardless, but now that we do not have additional vertical accretion of these wetlands, it doesn't counterbalance the natural subsidence. So the type of landmass that you see here, especially in light of climate change, is going to be due to subsidence. So sea level rise, Louisiana, in this map you can see, has one of the highest rates of sea level rise, again because of that reason of a land subsidence. And sea level rise has many different deleterious impacts on wetland ecosystems. One example for Louisiana is the disappearance of barrier islands. So again, I flew over these barrier islands, and they're really small. They're not as big as they look, but sea level rise is going to cause the encroachment of these barrier islands landward, or cause them to disappear in general. So there is land restoration that is happening to counteract this land loss. There have been many plans made. Only a couple of them are actually federally enacted. In 1990, there is CWIPRA, the Coastal Wetlands Planning Protection Restoration Act, that has about 151 projects. But right now they're having issues of funding. And so the main plan now is the 2012 Coastal Master Plan, and that was passed in 2012. And so they have an arrayment of projects that they decide to come up with, but they said if they choose the particular 109 has a price tag of $50 billion, but apparently $50 billion later they'd be able to save the wetlands. But my thing is, as an outsider, seeing the vulnerable communities like Ile-de-Jean Charles that I showed you earlier, I was wondering how those communities are being protected and if their land is being restored in general. So one thing that I found interesting is that in the front of their master plan, they have these pictures of the Native Americans, of the community members, and I've actually seen a couple of them, and they do live in South Terrebonne Parish. So in my mind, I'm wondering, how are they actually being involved in this master plan? The master plan, the projects that they chose were chosen via scientific decision making, and so it may not have anything to do with the social vulnerabilities. And so I was looking at how they tried to include these people. And so I flipped through the plan, and it says that they had about 10 meetings, only 10 meetings, statewide during the drafting period to address the public's comments and concerns. That's only 10. I don't know how you're supposed to get everyone's comments and concerns in 10 meetings while you're still writing this plan. But only one of them occurred in South Terrebonne Parish, where I was sent, during August. August 10th is the beginning of the shrimping season, so the people that are going to be attending these meetings aren't going to be representative of the actual population that's at risk. And so that just made me curious in general. And I just flipped through and I saw a couple of quotes that I thought were important in the plan. They're saying that they recognize that the citizens showed passion and knowledge about the coast, which is cool. But then what I didn't like was they're saying they wanted to capitalize on the local knowledge. I'll address why that isn't something that you should be doing in terms of these vulnerable communities. And my favorite quote is saying that the citizens and stakeholders aren't going to help identify the solutions with the state. So they're saying they're trying to make up these plans for these people and strategies, but these people are not involved in helping to make the solutions. And so this is a telltale sign of a top-down approach, where basically you have the researchers and scientists trying to formulate these strategies for the people. And this is something that I feel like we shouldn't be doing. We need to have more of a bottom-up approach, where you start from the grassroots level and you start with the people who have been dealing with this land loss hazard all of their lives. And the methodology of doing so is called participatory action research, or PAR. I've never worked under PAR before, and this was my first experience, but I had some really good mentors. I had Shirley Laska and Chris Peterson I was working with. But some of the main things that I learned is that as the researcher, you are not capitalizing on the local knowledge. You are working with the people, and you're collaborating with the community members. The researcher and the community members are now at the same level. There's no power differentiation. The people are the ones that are defining the problem and coming up with the solutions. And as a researcher, I'm supposed to go in there not knowing anything. I'm supposed to have the people teach me their way of life and teach me what it is that they're going through and what they're experiencing. So PAR doesn't necessarily have a rigid scientific approach. PAR is kind of like more of a unconventional approach. A lot of more conventional researchers say that it lacks academic credibility or it's less reliable. However, I feel like that it's necessary because you cannot make these strategies and plans for adaptation. You cannot expect them to be sustainable in a community if you're not including the community members in the plan. So it kind of has this one direction flow where it starts with decolonization of self, and that's kind of a fancy word of saying you need to get rid of any biases that you have in the area. For example, I was going to South Louisiana, and what does everyone think about when they think of South Louisiana? Swamp people. So in my mind, I'm thinking I'm going to be in the swamps with these people, and I'm wondering how I'm going to be able to understand them. I need subtitles when I'm trying to talk to these people. It's all these biases in my head. I need to get rid of them before I even enter or start doing any research. And then that's when I can start working with the community members to conceptualize the problem. Then you're able to gather the information with them, take action on it, and reflect on that action. Sometimes that action may not go as planned. You may have had limited resources or something didn't go quite right, and so you have to think about it, how you're going to rectify the situation, and then go back again to conceptualizing the problem, and then it's just you keep on going round and round in this cyclical cycle. So in all, PAR is supposed to be mostly beneficial for the community, where you're empowering the community, you're increasing their confidence as people, because a lot of these times their voices are being, not being heard per se, but if you start working with them, you're going to start empowering them and allowing them to starting to build these skills that can help self-advocate. They can start working towards plans and working towards coping mechanisms starting from their community. And a lot of the times, vulnerable communities are looked at as victims of whatever hazard, and once you start putting this victimization label, then you're going to start creating that power differentiation that you cannot have in PAR. And so they're not victims anymore. They're not the researched ED. They now are the researchers as well. But as the researcher, you start to see some limitations. Sometimes the local stakeholders may not give you as much support as you need because you are now working with the community members when they're used to a top-down approach. Sometimes you can create these plans and they may not happen. They may not be launched. They may not be followed through. And a lot of times in the literature, a lot of these PAR projects, the community doesn't feel like they are taking any type of ownership of these plans, even though it's for them and by them. So in terms of where I was doing my research, again, this is South Terrebonne Parish. Worked in 5 communities. We call them the 5 fingers, because it's kind of like 5 fingers pointing downwards, where you have Dularge on this leg, Dulac, Chauvin, Montague, Pointe-aux-Chênes, and then this is the island, Ile-de-Jean-Charles. So I ended up talking with these communities and asking them what the problem was in their mind. So the problem was that there isn't an awareness of this land loss, and that was a typical example because I did not know. Most people only know about the land loss, if they do. They only know about it as a geological sense. They don't know that there is a vibrant culture that's also being threatened. And also the local knowledge, the people, they're being suppressed by the researchers and scientists. People don't necessarily respect what they have to say. So in the literature, there has been times where technology has been used in like post-disaster response periods. So things like Katrina, where technology has been used to help communities stick together even when they're dispersed. And so some members, community members, are saying, why can't we do something like that? But why do we have to wait till post-disaster phase, especially when we're currently in a disaster? So we decided to adopt some sort of mobile technology that will hopefully create land loss awareness, especially in light of the culture at risk. And we decided to call this app Vanishing Point. And also for my thesis, I wanted to look at the role of risk perception and sense of place, or place attachment. The level of risk perception of land loss in the people is going to impact how motivated they are to act and come up with these adaptation plans. And then also place attachment is more of a way of looking at how the people are attached to their identity, how their identity is attached to their environment. These people have been there for centuries. They can trace back their ancestors and where their ancestors even lived. Most of them still live in the same neighborhoods or areas for generations upon generations. So they're extremely attached to their environment, but I wanted to know what the impact of that is on future adaptation plans. So the research questions that I pose are, what's the advantages and disadvantages of using PAR in light of climate change adaptation? I wanted to see how it is that a project like Vanishing Points, how does it address the limitations that literature had previously addressed, so things like the not having any sort of ownership over the projects. How does the information in Vanishing Points impact sense of place and risk perception? And finally, can this app actually have positive effects on adaptation and practices? Alright, so my research has 2 main methodologies, 2 main research pieces, both happening simultaneously. One is the app development, and the second is the assessment of the risk perception and sense of place. So when I was down there 2 summers ago, and this summer in Louisiana, basically PAR begins as being integrated into the community. The community is not going to accept you, they're not going to trust you until you can actually show that you are there and you're there with good intentions. So I went shrimping, I went boating, I went on fishing excursions, I went to drum circles, community meetings, anything to possibly integrate myself with this community and have them trust me, I did. And so once that was able to happen, then I was able to start identifying these areas of cultural importance by going on the news, by putting ads in newspapers, by going door to door and talking to people. Um, and I wanted to make sure that these locations were verified and as important by at least 3 different people. And then once I realized, okay, this place is important, then I'll go out and collect information about these places and start recording the information that's necessary. And I'll talk about those pieces that are needed. But for each location, I wanted a description of the place. I wanted to know why it was important from the perspective of the community members. I didn't want to go onto the internet and find a description of it. I wanted to find pictures, historical and current pictures, and then I also wanted to have other types of geographic information on the app as well. I was able to get aerial photos from a survey company called T. Baker Smith, where they basically gave me 15 gigabytes of aerial imagery that I have to comb through to somehow find these locations and create land loss animations. And all of this content is going to be put into WordPress, and a framework for the app will be built. So part 2 of the methodology of the assessment of risk perception, I ended up distributing a survey. The goal was the magic 200 number, but given that I didn't have an email listserv and I mostly had to do this in person, we dropped it down to 150, and we used Qualtrics. So Qualtrics is online, but I mostly used it as a data collection space where I went and did the surveys in person and then put the data and put the survey results in Qualtrics. And then I also did interviews with key informants in person. And the data analysis is going to again involve Qualtrics and MaxQDA, which is just a qualitative data analysis software. So some of the results that I have thus far involve what I learned about PAR and what happened with the app. PAR is extremely difficult and extremely hard, and it's something that I did not realize would be so time consuming. You are basically doing this research in real time with people. It's one thing to model and sit at a computer and analyze data on a computer, but it's another thing to actually work with people. You have to be in an area where you're trying to be as most convenient for them. You have to make them comfortable. Sometimes people will be interested in what you have to say, sometimes people won't be interested, some people get sick. So it's a lot of different aspects that happen. And then another major thing is, as a researcher, you're exposed to the environmental risks around. I am extremely allergic to mosquito bites, so that was very much so an environmental risk that I was not happy with, as seen in that picture. When I went shrimping with these fishermen, we're still catching tar balls because of the BP spill. Those are like these rocks are like this size or so, and they still are catching tar balls in the water. And water quality problems are very much so prominent in that area also. Some other things you should need to recognize is that when you're talking with community members and when you're with them, you're collecting a substantial amount of qualitative data, and you have to be able to filter out the most relevant information, and so that was also time consuming. In terms of the app and the results for the app, I was able to collect information for 24 different points, or identify 24 points, but collect information for 7. And again, the information was the location and the description of it, pictures, and video interviews. So this set of pictures is just an example of the type of historical and current pictures I want. I wanted at least per location, I wanted one historical picture and then go back to that exact spot and take it present day. So the little mailbox is an example of the landmark. And so 1960, again using the example of Ile de Jean Charles, you can see that the foliage and the vegetation is very much still alive, but in 2012, when I took the picture last year, none of that is there. In fact, most of the foliage in the back of the picture, that's all open water in the back there now. So thanks to NCAR, we were able to actually create a framework for the app that's now online. And basically what it is, it's a Google Maps that has these points pinpointed. When you click on the points, it's going to give you the description. It's just going to give you a couple little tabs to go to the different content pieces I described earlier. And again, here's the before and after picture that I described, and then other current pictures that are there. The geographic information is also going to be on there, and then any type of interviews that I have a YouTube channel that I'm going to put all the interviews on and link the YouTube videos to this app. In terms of the survey results, I was not able to get 150. I only got 125, mostly because of literacy limitations, where most of the people, they will talk to you for hours and talk to you all the time, whenever you want. But if I was to put a survey in someone's mailbox, I would not get a response. And so I willingly would go to people's houses and do these surveys. I was kind of like an on-call doctor all of this past summer, where people would call me because they put ads in the paper and I was on the news also. So I just get phone calls all the time. Oh, you should come here and come to our house. And so that's how I basically did all these surveys. And then I also interviewed some of the major Native American chiefs. The police and fire chiefs are very involved in the communities, and they have lived in those communities for years. And so I had interviews with them and various community leaders, even the elders, the well-respected icons of the communities. So for me, the next steps right now is to analyze the survey and interview data via Qualtrics and the MaxQDA, and also I would like to geocode the results onto GIS. In terms of the application vanishing points, I want to be able to finish that. Probably not going to finish it in the time that I'm here, but I still want it to be a finished project at some point in time. So I need to populate the points and populate the app with more points. I want to involve high school students in the area. Right now, there's such a major drift between the older generation and the younger generation, and I feel like this app can be a good measure, a good way to try and get intergenerational cultural transmission of the type of values and things that most younger kids don't appreciate nowadays. And so I feel like if they're involved in this app, they'll be able to now help advocate for proper adaptation methods and practices. I also want to identify a local web designer. I like the app now, it looks cool, but I think it could be more aesthetically pleasing. So I'd like to get a web designer for that. And then a web manager. A lot of the community members say that they would like this app to be like a community tool where they could have it as a message board, have type of, what is it called? Weather advisories. They want to be able to like pages, check into places, share pages, and do all sorts of things that I would love to learn to do, but I do not think I have the time to do it. So a website manager would be awesome if we're able to get that. And all in all, I just want this application to be something that's self-sustainable in the community and something that they can take ownership of. So here are some of my references and some of the many entities that I worked with throughout this project and still continue to work with. And if you have any questions, I'll take them now, but I wanted to give you some quotes that I received throughout the summer that were really heart-wrenching. The summer is extremely emotional, the past 2 summers being in that environment, and so if you read some of these, it's you'll start to feel how land loss is affecting these vulnerable communities and how much they do need help. So that's all I have for you. Thank you. If you have any questions.
You mentioned Native Americans, and there's a quote there, the third one on the left, right? Something about our card. Can you tell us about the racial composition in the area?
So that area has mostly the Cajun French. They have the Cajuns, and Cajuns and the Creoles, they're actually not the same. They're mostly Cajun. There are two main Native American communities, um, and there's a Vietnamese community, there's an African American community, there's a Korean community. It's very diverse now that I think about it. There are a lot of different, let's see if there's any other ones. No, that's about it. So, yeah. So.
And are there tensions between these communities, or do you find it in this diversity
They kind of stick to themselves. I don't know if you remember seeing, but where'd it go? The fingers that I was showing you, where'd it go? These fingers, they're all separated by the water, and so you cannot go across them. You have to go up and down them. And I feel like the water in itself creates these divisions between these communities. And so, like, this Native American community here has tensions and problems with the one over there. And mostly it comes from how and why some of these communities are federally recognized as Native American tribes and why some aren't. And so those are some of the main tensions and why it's not hostility, everyone's really friendly there, but it's just, there's like a sub-ground, sub-below tension, as you mentioned, yes.
You know, I mean, in the face of climate science, your website faces a risk of becoming a wonderful electronic museum. Eventually, in that situation, they're going to have to be resettled as communities. Certainly, that would be preferable to piecemeal resettlement. But that's what you're looking at eventually, and there's no sugarcoating. There's no sugarcoating that. It's something that we face here in South Florida too, by the way. But I mean, how do you reconcile that?
They don't really. They know that they're going to have to move eventually, but I've had people tell me that they would rather drown in their home than have to move.
They're not going to do that.
So, which one? The drowning or the moving?
They're not going to drown in their homes.
No, so basically...
What will happen is they're not going to drown in their homes. That's not the way the scenario works. There's going to be some major storm event that is going to be the trigger for a permanent evacuation. That's what will happen, because there will be no recovering from those damages.
And the main problem for them is that they want to be able to move as one community and not necessarily separate. And so they're having issues trying to figure out spaces and lands where they can all go as one instead of be dispersed.
There was a documentary film I saw right here at FIU about a year ago about some low-lying islands in Papua New Guinea, the Carteret Islands. They had to be abandoned by a community. They also lived, these were people who had lived in the community for, many generations. And they had to move as a group to another, to the adjacent continent, I think, but that might be that might be useful for you to look into. It's the Carteret Islands is the name of this island group.
And you said Papua New Guinea?
Papua New Guinea, right. Yes, that's right. And Carteret, Carter E.T. at the end. Okay. Carteret Islands. And so there were a lot of tensions and so forth with other ethnic groups that they had to, and they wanted to move as a community as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a nice parallel there.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah.
So you mentioned during your discussion about the CAR process that sometimes along that process you have to sort of abandon some inquiries and ideas and then double back and almost start over from an earlier point. Was there any part in your research where you had to adjust like that?
Yes, multiple times. More so when it came to my thesis work. So like for the surveying, for example, for the surveying when I realized that I can't email, I cannot mail, there are a lot of different limitations that I had, and so I had to readjust accordingly. But in terms of working with the community in the PAR process, then there are several ideas. Everyone has such amazing, grandiose ideas, and you want to be able to apply all of them, but you can't. And so we try to apply them and realize it's not possible at all. For example, some people wanted to be able to predict the amount of land loss for their particular area, for like for a certain cultural point, and we couldn't. USGS and CLIPRA, all the other main entities that have the data for me to be able to model and predict the amount of land loss, they didn't want to be connected with this app whatsoever. They ignored my emails after a while, and some of them were actually not as nice, and I don't know why. But again, that brings the problem of not having the support from the local stakeholders. So that's one example of how we had to drop an idea and start over again. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was in Jean-Charles in April.
Oh, awesome.
Pretty amazing place. But so it strikes me that it felt so hopeless. Like that road is floating
so
on water.
sad.
There's really no way
Yeah.
it's gonna last. But there were some attempts to try and save it. Like there were some floating, constructed fake wetlands people made out of plastic bottles and planted with spartina and put around the road.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's really a good idea, but is this a way to develop action, or is it just a way to kind of show losses?
The app itself?
Right, or your project.
Yeah, I mean the project, the app in general is for me to show the losses, and then to hopefully motivate action. Not just in these communities, but elsewhere also, to hopefully bring some sort of, what is it called? For if the other people, especially if the state, know that these people need help, then hopefully they'll be able to help them.
Okay,
Yeah, it's sad that even people in Baton Rouge that are not necessarily that far away don't know about these communities. I even was hanging out with a couple of college students in just the city that's in Homa. I don't know where Homa. Yeah, in Homa. They've lived there all their lives, and they're like, "You're going where? You're going to Jean-Charles?" They didn't even know where that was, but they're people who've lived there. So I feel like the app is something that's important for them to recognize, not just state-wise, but nationally also.
I'm sure there's some amazing stories. Someone told us that we took a boat, it took us half an hour to get someone to Barrier Islands. We got there, and they said that their father had ridden his horse there.
Yes, most of, in Jean-Charles, a lot of, from Jean-Charles, from this little island to Pointe-aux-Chenes, the community over there, it was just pure land, and people could walk there and take horses. So it's not there anymore.
Oh, I see. So you won't be able to.
Oh, I've got it on the PowerPoint actually as well.
And then you can use or you can advance the slides. Pointer is the red thing. Red and then right. Okay, Josh is going to talk about his proposed research in Key Largo, which he just started the last few days.
So my project is entitled Canopy Gaps and Leaf Phenology as Drivers of Succession in a Seasonally Dry Tropical Forest. jump right into it. Hardwood hammock is a forest type we have here in South Florida. Once fairly widespread throughout South Florida, particularly on the high ground of the Atlantic coastal ridge, as well as a bit in the tree islands of the Everglades, from which it gets the hammock name. Most of these within Dade County have been permanently lost to development, and the remnant examples we have left are mostly in Biscayne National Park, North Key Largo, and the hammocks, the tree islands in Everglades National Park. So it's part of the greater seasonally dry tropical forest biome, present particularly similar in the Caribbean. We have comparable forests in Puerto Rico, probably some in Cuba, Bahamas, Jamaica, different islands, but those are the ones most similar, although we have similar biomes in South America and Africa as well. But I'm studying the successional processes of these forests to better understand their management. So one of my very first tasks for this project was updating. You can't study succession without knowing how old anything is. So I started with this 1995 map. So on the left-hand side, we have a 1995 hammock age map from Softail, South Florida Terrestrial Ecosystems Lab, led by Dr. Mike Ross. And I updated this with more recent data. It looks like there's actually more forest ages on the left, but those actually include urban areas, disturbed areas, as well as a few other categories. Well, I broke mine into a little bit more recent updates, lands that's been disturbed since 1971, which is the last time on this one. And the way I did this was by studying almost a century's worth of aerial photographs at about 10 to 20-year intervals when they were available. So the dark green areas are the oldest forests, some of which are over 100 years old, we believe, because they were forested in the oldest aerial photos, and they've remained forested since then. And the youngest ones were abandoned from commercial development as late as 1992. So just a little history here. The Upper Keys, if you remember from a couple weeks ago, was used pretty intensively for agriculture. And this mosaic pattern that we could see here is created mostly by different waves of agricultural abandonment. They grew pineapples and limes and various other tropical fruits here in North Key Largo. But what we can see here, the most recent abandonments were after Hurricane Andrew. The Port Bougainville housing development was abandoned in North Key Largo, the southern portion of North Key Largo. So getting right into the forestry aspect of it, Softail, under the direction of Dr. Ross, has been studying this one particular forest for a while. And they've been able to come up with a bit of a successional sequence for species. So there's a lot of information on this chart. I'm going to go through it. The different names are their abbreviations for the scientific names of all 26 forest canopy tree species that we find on Key Largo. And you'll notice at the top of the graph, we're really seeing more the dark lines, the deciduous species, and that refers to the early successional trees, the pioneer species. Most of these are deciduous, drought deciduous. They lose their leaves in the wintertime. And at the oldest parts of the forest, we have evergreen trees. So the early successional trees notably include Lysoloma, Guitarda scabra, Metopium toxiferum is really kind of towards the middle, but a very common one. Well, towards the oldest forest, you get both of the Drypetes species, Laterifolia and Diversifolia, Calotranthus pallens, Crugiodendron ferrum, and a few others. But especially when you get to the old forest, it gets almost entirely drawn towards evergreen species. And the line in the middle of the graph here represents the average size by diameter at breast height of the trees. So you get, like the biggest tree by average is Lysoloma, up near the top, for a very large tree in the early successional area. So again, we already know that the first difference is that there's a difference in leaf phenology, the timing of leaf production and loss. And it's very important to know that this was a hurricane-dependent forest, hurricane-disturbed forest. When Dr. Ross gave his presentation at the beginning of the semester, he talked about pulse disturbances versus press disturbances. And hurricanes are a pulse disturbance. It's a one and done, creates the damage, and the recovery begins the next day. Versus a press disturbance would be something more like an extremely intensive fire agricultural development or commercial development really preventing the long-term reproduction and really resetting the successional sequence like we've seen from the agricultural abandonment. Last major hurricane that came through this area was Hurricane Andrew, 1992, and it hit Key Largo pretty good. That was about the southern extent of where the real heavy damage was between Homestead and Key Largo. So I've started creating these very simple, kind of silly-looking models of conceptual forest design to illustrate both what we already know and my multiple hypotheses for this study. What these graphs are, we're starting with the early forest at the top, going down to the old forest. And we start with an almost entirely deciduous forest following abandonment. These deciduous trees, especially Lysoloma and a few others, are the first ones that come in after agricultural abandonment and overtake the shrub and fern layer. It's important to note that unlike hardwood hammocks and other forest ecosystems elsewhere in Florida, Key Largo does not form a pine rockland. The Upper Keys don't at all. That's because there's an insufficient freshwater lens to support the higher water demands of slash pine and other coniferous vegetation. So when I say evergreen vegetation, I'm not referring to conifers, I'm referring to broadleafed angiosperm vegetation that does not lose its leaves in the dry season. When you get, so this top model, after the canopy closes, it persists for roughly 30 to 40 years like this, being almost entirely dominated by deciduous trees. For the next 40 to 70 years, or rather 40 to 70 years after abandonment, we start to get a mixed forest. It's still mostly a deciduous canopy, fairly rough canopy, not nearly as even of a canopy as an old forest. Primarily deciduous species still at the canopy, but you do get small, narrow canopied evergreen species coming up through the understory, and at this point the shrub layer is really being shaded out. Finally, we can tell at the end here that we have this fairly even canopy layer, and it's almost all evergreen species. So I'm asking the question of why this compositional change is happening. And we might want to know, do we want this compositional change to happen? And I'll address that at the end. But this will potentially give us insight into management of the forest. So here's my first hypothesis, and I'm going to start by explaining this chart here. The rainy season is across horizontally, the dry season across horizontally as well, and the columns are the young forest and the old forest. Since these deciduous trees are drought deciduous, they lose their leaves in the dry season, and I believe this should allow greater light availability at the forest floor in the dry season. I'm going to stop here and mention that there's two mechanisms, two drivers I'm looking at. One slow driver and one fast driver. This would make leaf phenology the slow driver for the long game, the long-term change in the absence of a major pulse disturbance. So that in the absence of a major windstorm causing mortality of trees, this will still result in evergreen trees potentially able to sequester the minimal rainfall during the dry season and continue their growth. I also believe in the old forest, because it's almost entirely evergreen, there should be really no change in light conditions or leaf area index in the dry season from the wet season. My second hypothesis moves on to canopy gaps. And I'll get to why old is greater than 5 years and why I'm studying that. But I think the old canopy gaps should have a greater sapling density, and saplings here defined by under 2 centimeters diameter at breast height. Then it should have greater sapling density than the surrounding forest around it, and it should have more evergreen species. So in this chart I've used little skull and crossbones to represent a tree mortality, but in reality they're not just, it's not like a canopy is dying. The soil layer in Key Largo is so thin, it's this really thin, nutrient-poor organic soil layer, that what happens when a tree dies, it mostly tips over, uprooting, bringing quite a bit of soil with it, and sometimes knocking down another tree with it. I'll mention that my definition of a canopy gap for this study that I can identify on the LiDAR data, and I'll get to that, is at least 15 meters across at the greatest width. It doesn't have to be exactly a circle, it just has to be 15 meters across, and it has to be 6 meters down from the upper surface of the canopy. My third hypothesis deals again with canopy gaps, but I think that canopy gaps, when looking at the entire island, there should be more canopy gaps, a greater number, and larger canopy gaps in the deciduous forest. And this just relates to the physical morphology of these trees, that these deciduous trees form big, wide canopies. If you remember Dr. Van Bloom's presentation last week, he talked about the pioneer tree species in Puerto Rico often form just like this, a very broad canopy that creates a lot of wind resistance, so that when these hurricanes hit, it's going to take down the tree with the greatest canopy size. And we actually know from a few different studies that hurricane mortality tends to be concentrated among deciduous species, pioneer species that form these large, broad canopies. It's corroborated from studies here in South Florida, Puerto Rico, North Carolina, and the Bahamas. Again, same legend here, deciduous and evergreen trees, canopy tree mortalities represented by the skull and crossbones. So now on to how I plan to study this. I've already began sampling transects in North Key Largo based on pre-existing vegetation transects sampled by, chiefly investigated by Jed Redwine, who got his PhD here at FIU, studying with Dr. Ross, as well as Dr. Ross, and I also got to pitch in a couple days in sampling some of these vegetation transects. So what I'm doing is a method called hemispheric photography, where I take a camera, in this case a Nikon 995 Coolpix series, mounted on a tripod with an FCE8 converter lens, that's a fisheye lens, facing directly up at the canopy. The photos are all taken in black and white. I can only operate under overcast skies or in a narrow window of time between about 4 and 6 p.m. or early in the morning, but it's too hard for me to get up to Key Largo that early. And what this gives us is a measure, when put into a program called Gap Light Analyzer, of leaf area index and total light transmittance. So this photograph, I do have actual photographs from Key Largo already, but I like this one because it's right outside this building, in between here and ECS. You can kind of see the side of ECS on the upper portion of the building. So this fisheye photography, done both in transects in young, medium, and old forests, as well as canopy gaps, will give me these measures to compare. On to finding the canopy gaps. I am here with a ground-based LiDAR unit. I should explain, LiDAR is a remote sensing technology. It stands for light detection and ranging. And it operates, it shoots a beam, a laser beam out, and it measures the time it takes for the beam to come back based on the known constant speed of light. Now, in my original proposal for this project, I was going to use this ground-based LiDAR unit, but it proved to be, we didn't really have the budget for it, so instead, I'm using aerial LiDAR data to find canopy gaps here in Key Largo. The data is from 2007, and that's why I can only look at old canopy gaps, ones that are at least 5 years old. And this is just a little diagram of how this data is collected. I've got it on the next slide, showing how a plane flies at a constant altitude, pretty much on cruise control, scanning back and forth, taking millions of individual points of various returns, whether it hits the upper surface of the canopy, leaves somewhere in the middle of the canopy, stems in the canopy, or all the way down to the limestone bedrock. And this data is available through FIU online, and you can see my study area of Key Largo gridded out into the various .las files for download. So the way I'm doing this is I'm creating a digital canopy model. I'll come back to this image in a couple slides, but the digital canopy model is made from subtracting one model from another. I'm going to explain this. It starts with the hardwood hammock boundary. Although I made the actual age model, the hammock boundary was delineated by Junio in our lab technician, and this is just delineated from current aerial photographs. Superimposed over this, we start with the digital surface model. Now these are the very first layer of returns, the very first thing that light hits and bounces back to. Now you would think you could study canopy gaps with just this because it's the top of the canopy, but you can't. You have to correct it for variations in elevation. And that comes to the next model, and something very interesting that you can see in the elevation model. This is the limestone bedrock, and you can actually see the black dots in this area. I should explain also the light color, high elevation, dark, low elevation, or open water. But the dark circles you see are solution holes and sinkholes into the limestone bedrock. So by subtracting these two, you create a digital canopy model out of the surface and elevation models. The color scheme is a little confusing here. Anything that is in color is of no interest. I just did that because I have an easier time seeing grayscale because I'm slightly colorblind. The arrows here are pointing to large canopy gaps, and there's actually 5 here. There's 2 at each of the 2 arrows that are pointing to at the top, and 1 at the bottom. And in the grayscale, I set the color scheme to represent 6 meters down, and the pixel, I just count the pixel width to find if it's 15 meters across. It's important to point out there are other areas that seem like it should be hardwood hammock. Off to the right, but that's actually a buttonwood mangrove ecotone, a blending of the ecosystems as the hardwood hammock elevation drops and the water gets a little bit saltier and it can't really support the freshwater dependent hardwood hammock vegetation. So I'm just going to wrap it up talking about the management implications of a project like this. Key Largo is home to a tremendous number of endangered species. Key Largo wood rat, studied by Lauren Barth, Key Largo cottonmouse, Schaus swallowtail butterfly, Miami blue butterfly, American crocodile out in the marshes just off the hardwood hammock. And understanding how these forests change over time could be critical for management. And the big examples with the Schaus swallowtail butterfly. They require dappled light penetration through the canopy, which I don't think we're really going to have as much of in the older forests. And their main food plants, torchwood and wild lime, only regenerate near old roads, canopy gaps, and other areas with greater light penetration to the forest floor. So it's very important to know, right now we're really not actively managing. It might be worth knowing, do we need to clear cut a few small areas to reset the successional pattern and allow for regeneration of the plants necessary to support these endangered species? And a final implication is there are implications for tropical agroforestry here, as some of these species that grow in the hardwood hammock are actually quite valuable, notably West Indian mahogany, which produces a beautiful, tight-grained reddish wood, which makes very nice furniture. So hopefully I would like to see if this has implications for beyond just Key Largo in South Florida to other areas where the seasonally dry tropical forest biome occurs. I'd like to thank Dr. Ross, Dr. Rehage, Dr. Zhang, Lauren Barth, Pablo Ruiz, and the guys in the lab, Jesus and Junio, as well as Jet Redwine. Thank you. Do we have time for a question or two? Or?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I know I went through that kind of fast. I was kind of against the clock there a little bit. But
so, do you have any idea how hurricanes, like how frequently they'll cause the gaps?
I would say 20 to 30 years for the hurricane striking South Florida. However, it doesn't require a hurricane to create these gaps. All it takes is a sufficient windstorm to really uproot some of these tropical trees. I mean, when you see the soil, it's so incredibly thin that I'm surprised that you couldn't just get a few people and push one of these trees over from the base.
This Schaus swallowtail needing a little bit of light is pretty interesting. Do you think that this area used to have more canopy gaps or something? Or is it inevitable that it would grow into a more close canopy, or are we just in a certain cycle right now?
I don't know. I don't know exactly what historically it would have been. I would imagine there was probably more Schaus swallowtail on in Biscayne National Park and other parts of the hammocks of Miami-Dade County, probably dispersing almost like a metapopulation between the mainland and the islands. So who knows if there ever really were that many Schaus swallowtail in Key Largo, but certainly surveys have found they do go all the way down to Matacumbe Key, some of the other keys a little bit further down, but only in the upper keys.